Hello and welcome. My name is Elizabeth, and today we are going to be journeying down the Inca Trail into Machu Picchu. So I hiked the Inca Trail back in October of 2018, and I went with REI Adventures. I went by myself, I didn't know anybody, and I met up with two other couples that were in our group. And as well as we had a guide, porters, and a chef for the incredible experience of trekking through the Andes Mountains and seeing the world-famous ruins of Machu Picchu. So first of all, I just want to start with a little bit of information about the trail. So the Inca Trail, the one that the government allows people to trek, is 51 miles long. And you start the trail about at an elevation of 8,500 feet. So a little higher than we are here in Grand Junction, but not too bad, what we're used to in the mountains. And then the highest point of the trail is Dead Woman's Pass, and that is 13,829 feet. So just a little under a 14er for those of you who kind of know what that elevation feels like, I should say. And then you finally reach the lowest point of the trail when you hit Machu Picchu, and that is at 7,972 feet. Which is good because by the time you reach Machu Picchu, you're very tired, and the lower elevation feels quite nice, I will admit. So in order to hike the Inca Trail, you are mandated by the Peruvian government to have a guide with your group. Our group, because we were so small, only had one, but some groups, if they have 15, 20 people, will have 2 or 3 guides accompanying them. And you also need to have a permit. Now, there are only 500 permits that are issued per day, and these permits are for not only the tourists who are hiking, but also the guides and the porters. So that's 500 people total, not just 500 people visiting. So 500 people every day start the trail, and you kind of see them throughout, but for the most part, over 51 miles, those 500 people, it feels like there's really not that many of you up in the mountains hiking and adventuring together. So when we started the trip to the Inca Trail, we started from the city of Ollantaytambo, which, okay, full disclosure, I cannot speak Spanish. I cannot speak any of the native languages of that region. I can speak English and Japanese. So all of these pronunciations, don't copy me. Just go onto the internet and figure out how to say it. I tried that and I still am getting them wrong. So hopefully you will have better luck than I do at pronunciation. But Ollantaytambo is in the Sacred Valley, which is very popular for people to go to, and maybe I'll be able to do a travel segment on my experiences in the Sacred Valley at a different time. But we took a private van from there to the trailhead, which is just kilometer marker 82. That's pretty much it. You just go to kilometer marker 82. It's a fun place to be. As we're driving up there, the road, though, it was so narrow that in many spots, you had to kind of back out. The van did back out to let other cars who were dropping off other hikers go through. And so it was this kind of fun part to get off the highway, onto the trail, up to this mile marker. And we started getting going on the trail around 9:30. So when we first reached our meeting place where we would meet our porters and our chef and all of the people who would be taking care of us, we were greeted by this just enthusiastic clapping. And that's pretty much how they would greet us every time we would reach our lunch point or every time we would reach camp, is they would just come out and clap. Since we didn't have a common language, that was kind of their way of welcoming us, of congratulating us on what we had done that day. And I found that, well, they did it too. Like, these people are hiking the trail same as us. And so when I started after the first day when we kind of got acquainted, I figured out that if I just kind of danced my way into camp every day, they loved it. And they would have fun, and we got to smile and laugh. And even though we couldn't speak the same language, just to have that moment of, yes, we've been doing this trail together. We've been, making the same miles. They were carrying a lot heavier burdens than we did. because we only carried our day packs. So our porters and our chef carried everything else, our tents, our food, potable water, the bathroom stuff. I mean, just everything was carried by our porters. And here's a picture of one of our porters going by. Because of the trail degeneration, things were getting so bad in terms of the safety of the trail and such, they don't allow any pack animals to go. So no mules, no llamas, nothing. And so everything has to be carried by hand. And this here is one of our porters. I don't know if you see that giant big green bag on the back, but that is carried. We had probably around 11 of these guys just carrying everything that we would need for us, as they were very used to it and we were just struggling with our one-day pack. And so starting from mile marker 82, they have a little sign here, and this is our group. These are the two couples I was speaking about. They're both from the Midwest, so Wisconsin and Michigan. I think that's the Midwest. Anyways, a lot lower elevation than here. So I was breathing the best, I should say, out of all of us. But we all made it, so that was exciting. And so starting from day one. So you're excited, you take the picture, you're like, yes, we are doing the Inca Trail. And I was really surprised by kind of the vegetation and stuff that we saw on our way on this first section, because it's a very arid climate. So there were actually a lot of cactuses and other types of animals and plants that I wasn't planning on seeing. And it was, since we went in October, it's technically their winter, being in the southern hemisphere. And so everything was still kind of looking dead. It was just before the rainy season. We actually got caught a lot in rain because it was just kind of turning into that rainy season. But a lot of it kind of reminded me of hiking here in the Grand Valley, because you have the cactus and kind of the dry, arid plants and animals at your feet. But then up in the distance, you have the grand mountains, you know, kind of rising above you. And so it kind of really felt like I was at home. The first day, I was just kind of like, well, this isn't too bad, until we got to the ruins. And then I was like, well, you don't see this in Grand Junction, that's for sure. The very first day, we ran into some ruins kind of up, and we could look down into them. And this here are the ruins, as you see in the picture. And my little llama here, Cappuccino, he was gifted to me before I went, so I wouldn't be alone on this adventure. I would know at least one other person, a stuffed animal. But he's been my travel buddy ever since. And so you'll see him pop up in a few of these pictures. But these ruins used to be used on a different version of the trek. However, when tourists were going in there, they started damaging it, starting fires that shouldn't be there, being in there without guides. And so they kind of closed off these sections of the ruins. And you kind of heard that a lot. There were a lot of paths to Machu Picchu because people from all the surrounding area would travel there. A lot of times it was more of a religious place, and so they would make pilgrimages down to Machu Picchu. But the Peruvian government has designated this one kind of trail as the official trail to preserve places and to make sure everything doesn't get ruined, partly because of what happened down in this area. But now it looks very nice from afar. And it was quite interesting. You could tell that we were definitely on an original trail, because up on the trail as we passed stood what used to be kind of a guard tower. So the town was down below, but then there was a guard tower there kind of protecting it and keeping track of what was going on the road, on the trail, as people would go by. And so we got to see this guard tower and actually go in and kind of explore. These were ruins we could go and explore in. And if you see in this picture here, there's the windows. You can especially see it on the right windows, but they kind of slant in at the top. So they're a little wider at the bottom, and then they slant in to the top to make a rectangle shape. And I know there's an official word for it that's not rectangle, but just bear with me, you can see it. And the reason for this was for earthquake stability. So a lot of their buildings were built in this way so that if there was an earthquake or anything like that, they wouldn't actually fall down because they had these pockets in the walls with this irregular shape that would kind of help things not fall over. And this was one of the best parts I thought about doing the Inca Trail into Machu Picchu instead of just doing Machu Picchu, is that you learn a lot about this structural history. You get to get a lot closer to some of the ruins than you do in Machu Picchu before you even reach there. So there were a lot of times when we were in Machu Picchu where you could hear people talking, guides telling tourists things. And we're like, we already learned that like 3 days ago on the trail. And that was one of the situations. So once we got through our first lunch, our porters, they're a good like hour and a half. I don't even know. They're way ahead of us with their giant packs. They're amazing, amazing hikers. But they had already set up, they go and they set up our mess tent and the cooking tent, and they cook for us for lunch, and the same thing happens for dinner. And so for our lunch, we found out, I was expecting, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches type things, like really simple food, but we found out we were going to be eating really, really, really well on this trip, and that was one of the things that just blew my mind. We would have, really well done turkey and vegetables and a variety of different meats and beans and desserts. They would always give us these really nice desserts after each meal, and you're like, you're cooking in a tent. Like, I can't cook that well at home. How are you cooking this in a tent? It was phenomenal, and I was just blown away every time by what we got to eat. And so because the porters got ahead of us, not only would they set up at the end of the day, at lunch they would set up the mess table and the cooking tent, and then they would tear it all down and carry it to our campsite. And then when we got to the campsite, when we got there, everything would be set up. Our tents would be set up. You could smell them cooking dinner. They would have this tarp on the ground for us to put our stuff onto. They would meet us with hot towels to wash our hands off with, and like a little thing of juice for us to drink every single time we came in. And then they would give us some water and stuff to kind of wash our face and stuff like that before we went to dinner. And it was a little uncomfortable at first. I think this is why I started the kind of dancing routine, was because I wanted them to have fun too. I mean, this is such an amazing trip. The views are beautiful, and I'm sure they just do it, week in and week out with different groups. And I just wanted them to have as much fun as we were having. And so, yeah, it's a little awkward, but after a while, you kind of, as they would pass us on the trail, they would say hi to us because we were their group, or they would kind of dance or ask me like, "Oh, dance!" Like they would make the movements. So yeah, it turned out being a lot of fun. And then something else that I thought was just a little extra I wasn't expecting was, after dinner, they would bring us what they called babies. It was one of the few English words they knew. And they would say, "Babies, babies." And we're like, what? Like the very first night, we're all so confused. We're like, we don't want children with us on this hike? That's not what we signed up for? Like what babies? They were hot water bottles. So somehow they heated up, well, not somehow, they boiled water, obviously. But they had enough water with them that they heated up the water, put them in these hot water bottles for us to put into our sleeping bags at night, so we wouldn't get too cold, and those were our babies So every night they would come and be like, babies, babies, and we're like, okay, it's time to go to bed, which was usually like 7:30 because we were exhausted at that point. But yeah. So in the morning, we would get, after we go to bed with our babies, in the morning we would get woken up. We got woken up about 5:30 every morning by our porters and our guide. And our guide and our porters would come by and they would offer us, they would have a little wake up, and as soon as you answered, they would ask you hot coffee or hot tea. And so you just unzip your tent a little bit and you stick out your hand, and they would give you either a cup of hot coffee or a cup of hot tea. I tried to convince my roommates to do this when I got back, but they weren't at all having it. I must say it was really nice to, the very first thing is just to have a cup of hot coffee placed in your hand as you wake up. I got a little spoiled, I will admit that. 4 days of that, and I was like, I like this. But no more, only on the Inca Trail, only on the Inca Trail. But by the time we woke up, we kind of had to pack up our stuff again so the porters could put it back in their giant bags and carry it on for us. And we ate our breakfast, and we were on the trail by about 7 a.m. Now, the second day, I would say, would be the hardest day, because that's the day that you summit Dead Woman's Pass, and you get to that above 13,000 feet above sea level. And so the trail in this section kind of winds through humid woodlands as you rise through the altitude. And you can really tell that you're rising through the altitude. There's a lot of switchbacking, a lot of kind of stone steps to help you get up the steep parts. And that takes about half the day, I would say. We had lunch a little bit before we reached the summit, but we reached the summit, and they have a nice little thing that says, you made it, you're this many kilometers up, as most summits do. I got there about 20 minutes before the rest of my group. I think mainly because I'm from Colorado, and I've been climbing 14ers to get prepared for this because I knew I would be getting up to that elevation. And so I was just a little bit more in shape. But the nice thing about that was I got to stop and talk to a lot of the other groups that were going by. There was a lot of people there from Europe, some from Canada, and I got to speak to them because I got to speak to them about my favorite places in Vancouver because I just lived right outside of Vancouver, and it was a lot of fun just to see the other people on the trail and stop and take in the views. The views were really, really, really breathtaking. I mean, you think we know mountains being here in Colorado, but the Andes Mountains kind of take all of that and just burst it. I mean, they are one of the most impressive mountain ranges that I've seen in my travels. And I really, really wish to go back and see them. I mean, if my friend said, let's go do the Inca Trail, I would do it in a heartbeat, mainly for the views I saw on this section of the trip. So once we got to the top of the pass, the weather started to turn a little bit on us. Like I said, we were just right into that cusp of being the rainy season down in the southern hemisphere. And so the first hour of our descent, we had this combination of rain, hail, and sleet. It was quite a thing to be going down. Of course, it's a descent, so you're going down. Most of it is stone little steps in between some dirt. It was really slippery. I'm really thankful to have my poles. I put my camera away for most of this part of the trip because I just took a quick picture here right before we got started. I don't know if you can see all those bright people going down and around in their bright ponchos, trying to keep the rain off of them, but it was a little miserable, I will admit, but it was still a lot of fun once we got down to our base camp and we got met by our porters. And this was the night where we got to officially meet our porters, so we got to learn their names. They gave us a little gift. They gave us this necklace, and this is actually something I still wear most of the time when I go hiking. Just as no matter what trail I'm doing, I can say, well, I did the Inca Trail, so obviously I can do this one too, right? And so I kind of wear that as my, yes, you can do it necklace. So here's a picture of us with all of our porters and our chefs. You can tell the chefs wearing the little white jackets. And then on the other side here is a picture of our guide, Alfredo. He was a wonderful guide. He knew so much about the history and the fauna and just everything about the whole trail. He'd been doing it for many, many, many years. And we got to have, again, more delicious food. I just had to throw this. This meal was the point where I was like, what? Like the skill and ability of the people of the staff who were supporting us in this journey was incredible, because this was our dessert and it has spun sugar on the top. They made spun sugar in a tent in the middle of the Inca Trail after carrying all of their supplies. Like, what? It's just, they're so used to it. They live at these altitudes. Most of them are of the porters of our staff were from villages, that's close to the 10,000, 11,000 feet. They're used to running these things. For them, this is just, someone tells you to go walk around in your neighborhood type of thing, and they just do it. And for us, it's such a big thing we have to train for, and they're just making spun sugar in a tent. But that was about the end of day 2. So we got into bed, I would say, my notes say 7:15, and I'm sure I was 100% ready to sleep at that time after being up at 5:30. So day 3 started out pretty much the same as day 2. The only difference is your legs are a lot more sore. By day 3, I was definitely feeling that I had been hiking at altitude for 2 days. So you kind of had to work yourself back into that groove of, okay, let's go. But there were tons of things that were really cool to see on day 3. We kind of went up at the beginning to our second summit, which is a lot lower of an altitude than the Dead Woman's Pass. And then once again, as we went down on the downhill portion after we had reached that, the weather changed. That was kind of the story of our week on this trail. It wasn't a week, our 4 days on the trail. Is it would be nice during the day, and then as soon as we started going down slippery steps, it would rain. So yay for trekking poles. Those helped a lot. But this time, at least on day 3, it was only rain. We didn't have any of that hail or sleet or anything. But it wasn't only the weather that changed. So once you get over that kind of second summit, you hit the Amazon side slope of the Andes. So you're kind of on the side that goes into the Amazon forest. Eventually, I mean, we definitely weren't anywhere close, but there's kind of a shift in the ecological zones. And everything just becomes a lot more greener, and you see a lot more moss, and there's a lot more flowers blooming. Before, if you remember back to day 1, I mean, it definitely looked like the middle of winter here. I mean, everything is dead and dry and cactuses. But once you hit kind of the Amazon side of things, it's very much mossy and green, very humid. Everything looks like it's just been watered. And it was very, really interesting to see just in a couple days that difference in climate there. And then shortly before lunch, we hit what I thought was some of the most interesting ruins. They were kind of built high up. Here are 2 pictures of the staircases we had to climb to get up into the ruins. And so the first set is, you kind of go up and you think, oh, that's fine. And then you find out that you have a whole nother second flight of stairs to go up into these ruins. but they have been very well restored, and they were just beautiful, kind of on the cliff face of this mountain overlooking the valleys. And it was really, really pretty, and it was crazy to think that people like built up there. Like going up those stairs, I was a little scared. They were really small and narrow, and it had been raining, so it was slippery. And so we were, trying to go up there, and there's no guardrail or anything on the side. So you're like, I really hope, really, really, really hope I don't fall there. But these people used to live up there. Like this was just a normal village, and they would run up and down those steps, and it was just, to me, incredible to think, of living in this area, of living with these views and just being on the side of a mountain that high up. It was just incredible. Here's a view from the village, kind of looking out, and you can see the clouds that were occasionally peppering us with rain there. And then, of course, we had our lunch, kind of once we hit down in the valley. And this was like a cornbread, like a beef stroganoff type thing, but underneath was this cornbread type, I don't know how to call it. It's definitely made out of corn. The closest thing I can think of is cornbread, but it wasn't cornbread. It was delicious. Whatever it was delicious. And then this vanilla cream pie thing, which again, I don't know how they carry all of this food and cook it for us. When I was struggling to just carry my day pack. But after lunch, we hit the cloud forest. So this is more of a rainforest type area, and you are on, it's a very stone path. Most of it is a stone path that they've remade, and it just kind of winds around on this side of a mountain, and it looks like you're winding in and out of the clouds because you're pretty much at the same level as the clouds are. So sometimes you're underneath them, and then sometimes you're up above them, and sometimes it looks like you're even with the tops of mountains, far away, and sometimes it looks like they're just towering over you. It was like a magical part of the hike. And you really kind of felt like you were on top of the world as you were hiking through. And, you just would look over, and the only word I can use is enchanting. Like, it was the most enchanting. I felt like I was out of something from, a book, like a fantasy book, like a Lord of the Rings type book. The kind of the scenes you see from New Zealand and stuff. And it was just that kind of feel to it. And this was also when we first hit our first set of llamas that we got to see. So here I have a picture of Cappuccino the llama with actual llamas. You always hear of them spitting and stuff, so I tried not to get too close, but they are not afraid of humans. You would just they would push you out of the way to get to wherever they wanted to go. It was sometimes, you're trying to get through a path and they're blocking it, and you're like, okay, let's go now. And they did not want to move. But we got to the place where we sat for day 3. Here's a panorama from our campsite. And it was just an amazing place to stay for an entire evening and see the sunset and see the sun rise there. This is why when I tell people about doing the Inca trek and stuff, there's a couple options. You can do it in 3 days or you can do it in 4 days, then with an extra day in Machu Picchu at the end of each of those options. And I say do the 4-day. First of all, you have more time to get through the 51 miles, which is super nice. And second of all, if you do the 4 days, you end up here on your 3rd day. And it is just a beautiful, beautiful view. When we woke up in the morning, we got to have, they set out the breakfast table, but instead of putting the tent up above us, they just left it out open in the air. And we got to, eat breakfast at 5:45, 6 o'clock in the morning, watching the sunrise and just kind of seeing the clouds float. I mean, you couldn't even see the tops of some of the mountains because the clouds were covering them. So you kind of felt like you were above everything. And you were just, looking out from your from your view as you eat your delicious breakfast. It was one of my favorite memories from the whole trip was that breakfast. Not because of what we ate. We had eggs and bacon and toast. Really, you know, westernized breakfast. But just the view and the serenity that came from that environment. It was something I don't regret. I don't regret experiencing. I highly recommend to people who are going to try the Inca Trail to try to make sure that they hit a 4-day so they can experience it as well. Now, from this great height that we are, at the end of day 3, beginning of day 4, we've eaten our breakfast. We now are on our last day of the Inca trek. And most of this is going to be downhill. If you remember my information at the beginning of this talk about the different elevations, Machu Picchu is actually at the lowest elevation of this entire trip. And so we have to go from being way up here to all the way down to that lower elevation. And so most of the day was just going downhill. And there were a lot of steep staircases, rocks that we had to, you know, kind of get down. But there were also a lot more ruins, because the closer you get to Machu Picchu, the more, I want to say signs of civilization, but the more and more kind of villages and farms and stuff that you would go by. And so we went through quite a few. There were about 3 different ruins, but most of them were very small villages that you can see a lot of farming terraces on. And so most of the ruins were really these farming terraces where they used to farm in kind of steps going up and down the mountain, which gave them a lot more land to farm on versus if they were just looking for flat places because they were in such a mountainous area. And here is our group at one of these ruins to kind of take our group picture after 3 days of full hiking on our 4th day there. But then when we got to lunch, our porter surprised us with a giant cake. How they got this cake all the way there without ruining it, or how they got to cook it, I'm very confused how the cake got there. This was our 4th day. They carried everything in bags. I don't think they had enough time before us to cook a cake before we got to the lunch place, because it wasn't that much of a difference, because we did do the 4-day trek instead of the 3-day. Our last couple days are shorter in distance than what most people do. And so I have no idea where this cake came from. It was delicious. It was just what you needed on like your last day. You're super tired. You haven't showered. You've been sweating. You have so much bug spray on you. And they're just like, cake. And you're like, yes, cake. Still have no idea how that cake got there. No idea. But the rest of the trail after the cake was really, really easy. It's just kind of flat. You just kind of go through the mountains until you hit the 50 stairs. Now these are, I should say 50 steps. Now the steps are tiny, tiny little rock steps, so it's actually not that far, but it's almost like straight up this mountainside. Most people would go up, I mean, on, I would say all fours, because they're standing up straight almost, but you almost have to use kind of your hands to get up a portion of it until you kind of get to the top and you're able to straighten out a bit more. And of course, at the end of your 4th day, you're just kind of like, I have to go up what now? But it was kind of fun. You know, you run into other groups there who also were doing the 4-day trek with us. And you also hit some people who are doing, they have like a 2-day trek or a 1-day trek that kind of just does this in portion of the trail. And so we ran into some of those people as well, and everyone was giving each other encouragement, like, yes, you can do it, like, you're almost there, and, you know, you get to the top and everyone was high-fiving, and this definitely pre-COVID because we were all high-fiving, and it was just a lot of, like, camaraderie and fun over just 50 stairs. Like, that's it, just 50, not that much, but it felt like such a good feat. And of course, at the top of the 50 stairs, you are at the infamous Sun Gate, which I do not have a picture of, as it was really, really, really rainy once we got up there. We got up there, and you get to the Sun Gate. Of course, we were not there for the sunrise, as many people try to do, because we had been hiking all day. But we got up there, and we got to see our first view of Machu Picchu, and it was clouds, and only clouds. We weren't actually sure we were there. Our guy had to be like, hey, it's down there. We're like, where? He's like, beneath the clouds. And we're like, okay. So we stood there for a while with everyone else who was, waiting for that first glimpse of Machu Picchu, until finally the clouds kind of moved away and we were able just to see the ruins down there. And that's when we took this quick picture. Everyone was trying to get the same picture, so we would run, you get one picture, you take it, and then you would run back, and the next person in your group would take it, and you would try to take it as fast as possible, because you could see more clouds rolling in. So the other clouds would be rolling in, and everyone's trying to get a picture here, I saw Machu Picchu from the Sun Gate and stuff. You still really can't see Machu Picchu. It's way down there in this picture, because the clouds and the rain. But I saw it, so that was exciting. And then once we got closer to the ruins, we kind of hit the outside farming terraces of Machu Picchu, and we actually got to take a group photo there. Again, we had to wait for the clouds kind of to roll through before we could get a good shot of the ruins. But that is me and my group. First view of Machu Picchu. Luckily, it was not our last view of Machu Picchu, because we got to come back the next day. But first, we got to go to a hotel down in the valley. There is a town called Aguas Calientes, and it's down in the valley below, and there's a bus that kind of goes up the side up to Machu Picchu that takes everyone who's going up there. And so we got to ride the bus down, got to stay in a hotel, finally take a shower after 4 days of hiking. That was very, very well needed and was well appreciated. And then we got to bright and early on our 5th day actually go and spend time in Machu Picchu. And so here is my favorite photo that I took of Machu Picchu. We took this that morning of the 5th day when we got to go and explore. So what we did first is we went and we explored around the actual ruins and got to see, all the famous sites and all of that stuff. And then we got to go up and hike up to what's called Huanupichu, which is that mountain in the background that's kind of towering over the ruins. And so we got to go climb up there, and there are actually some temples and some other things up at the top that have been built there for religious purposes. And then we kind of got to see those, look down, again, from a great height onto the ruins. But I will get to those pictures in a little bit. First, we're going to explore Machu Picchu. Now, I could probably do an entire presentation on just Machu Picchu, but we're going to hit some of the highlights. And the first highlight is the Central Plaza, which is kind of there in the middle. And it's this just giant green space. And our guide was saying that there was probably a lot of instances where that's where they would do, big festivals, or if there was, some sort of announcement or something, they would all gather there. Nowadays, it's mainly used as a helicopter landing point. It's the only place in the whole ruins that if they're having someone famous come and visit, or they need to drop something off, by helicopter, that's the only place that they land. And so they kind of keep that area clear for those instances. And then one of the other kind of really cool, famous places that we saw was Temple of the Sun with the royal tomb. And so the Temple of the Sun was kind of built up. I have a picture here of the side of it. It's that structure in the middle with the little window there. But then as you go around the side of it, what you see is that it's built on this big giant rock that's split in the middle. And then as you go in, they believe that's where it was either a tomb or like an embalming kind of place, mummification place, because it has like a lot of the altar and stuff that they find for those type of activities elsewhere in the country, and they're not quite sure what it is, but it's just kind of hidden right underneath the temple, which I thought was really, really cool. And then the other place that we got to go see that I thought was the most interesting was kind of the royal house, so where any of the princes or anything like that would come stay when they came to visit Machu Picchu and do religious activities there. And so you can tell it belonged to a little bit more of a higher person in the society because the roofs were higher, just a little bit, and kind of more, there's more rooms and stuff. And this was where a lot of groups were talking about the architecture and the windows, and they were off to one side. And our guide said, okay, you guys all know about those window things. We've talked about them. Come with me, come with me. And so we're like, okay. So we kind of go into a back room, and he shows us this, and he's like, this is the bathroom. And we're like, what? Like, you brought us all the way here to see a bathroom? But apparently one of the reasons they knew that this was a royal residence was because of this room. And it took them a while to figure out what was going on when they were first excavating it. And that's because they just found this random hole in the ground that went somewhere. They're like, where does this go? And it would take if you like poured water down there, it would take the water and just go off until outside of the city. Actually, it would just like take it far away. And he's like, yes, so this would be where the prince would take a piss. And we're just like, cool. He had a whole room for just taking a piss. That's it. That's how you know it's a royal place. So now you know. Royals have whole rooms for that. But I was just one of those moments where you're not expecting, you're just like, these are, world famous ruins. This is such an interesting culture, this and that. And look, the piss room. But it's all good and fun. So now we get to go to the top of Huaynupichu. So Huaynupichu is, like I said, it's that mountain kind of behind that you get to go up, and they built temples and terraces up at the top. And so it's about 850 feet higher than Machu Picchu, so not too bad. But they only let 400 people a day go up to the top, and they split that between 2 times. So there's only an hour. You get a time slot, so you have this particular hour for 200 of those people to start the trail up and come down. I mean, you have to start it within that hour. You can come down whenever you're ready. But they only have these 2 hours in the day, 2 different hours that they let people go up and down. And so it's up at the top, and it's pretty straight up. If you Google like stairway of death in Machu Picchu, like these are the images that come up. Getting up to the top actually wasn't too bad. It's a lot of switchbacks. A lot of times they kind of have these cables for you to hold on and kind of pull yourself up. But once you get to where they actually built things, you hit these really tiny stairs that are, again, just almost straight up. It felt like our 50 stairs that we had done the 4th day was just like a small training ground for what we had to do when we hit Huaynupichu. And so it was, you had to be very careful going up. But as you're going up these tiny stairs, you look over and you see these kind of building terraces with even worse stairs. And you're like, well, at least they made us these tiny ones, so we didn't have to go up, as you see in these pictures. I mean, it's just like 4, I don't know if I would trust those stones personally. So I was very happy for the, hard stairs that we got. But once you get to the top of Huaynupichu, again, you get to look up and down and over into Machu Picchu from a different angle. And so this is a picture of me at the famous place. Everyone takes a picture here on Huanupichu looking down over Machu Picchu. But we had a very similar situation here that we did at the Sun Gate, in that by the time we got up to the top, the clouds were rolling in again. And the clouds would cover and you couldn't see anything below you. And everyone would just wait and wait and wait and wait. And then as soon as a break in the clouds happened, one person would run out and take a picture, and they would only have a couple seconds to get a picture in before the next person was trying to run out. But everyone was actually super nice. It was almost like we all knew we had traveled really, really far to get here, that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for most of us. And so no one was, if I was taking a picture, no one would try to crowd me or take my place. They would just kind of wait off to the side very patiently until it was their turn. Likewise, the people who were taking pictures understood that there was kind of a line behind them, and no one took that long. I mean, everyone, there was nobody saying, oh, your turn's over or anything like that. Just automatically, we just took a couple seconds each so that most people could get a picture in before the clouds came back, which I thought was super, super nice, and just kind of showed, I don't want to say camaraderie, but there's people there from all over the world, and none of us really speak the same language. I mean, you would hear different languages from all over, from Europe, from different places in Asia, you would hear Portuguese and all sorts of different things. But we all kind of were able to communicate with just our reverence of what that place was, of what these ruins were, and how important they are to capturing civilizations gone by, and just the awe and just magnificent of what they were able to build with their bare hands. And with that kind of just reverence and respect, we were all able to kind of work together to make sure that we all had the best experience, I should say. So that kind of finishes out my tour of the Inca Trail and Machu Picchu. I really hope that you enjoyed going along with me. Now, I know I didn't get a lot of pictures in of the actual Machu Picchu. There's a lot of other things in those ruins that I would like to talk about, but I know a lot of people do tours of just Machu Picchu, as the Inca Trail is a little less known and a little less visited than the actual ruins. Likewise, here at the library, we have a lot of books on Machu Picchu. And I cannot get through everything in one of these books in the amount of time that we have for this program. So I suggest, if you're interested in more about the architecture, more about the people who built Machu Picchu, what they think it was there for, that you would check out these books. I just kind of really wanted today to highlight the fun adventure of actually hiking what the Incas would have done. There were many times on this trail where our guide would say, these are the exact same stones Inca pilgrims went on as they went down, to do sacrifices and rituals and stuff like that at Machu Picchu. And so just kind of being in the Andes and seeing the history and being able to walk in the same steps that have been walked for hundreds and hundreds of years, it was just really, really, really cool. And I think it was a lot of fun. I did have to do a lot of training to get into it, but I would do it again in a heartbeat. So I hope that you have enjoyed your time with me in Peru, and that this has kind of whetted your tongue to the Incas and their history and their ruins, and that you will be able to go and explore more, either through the books. I know there are videos on Canopy as well about Machu Picchu and the Incas. So I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.